Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk. And in this episode of God Talk, I want to talk a little bit about Romans 8:28, the fact that God works all things for the good of those who love Him. I had a email conversation with a member of the church not too long ago who has a father that is dying of Alzheimer's and dementia, and he was asking me if it was wrong to pray for that person to die. And I said, not necessarily, but you need to ask yourself, why is it that you're asking for that? Is it because the person's a burden? And when you care for someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, listen, it's a horrible disease. It's not only horrible on the person who's going through it, but it's pretty horrible on the people that care for someone like that. There's agitation that they undergo, the sundowners that they call it. There's just having to deal with the heartache of the person not really remembering that they don't drive anymore and that they're not going to work, or that it's like Groundhog Day, and so it's very hard to deal with people that are dealing with those kind of emotions and frustrations. Not to mention when they just start physically can't get to the bathroom in time, and just the damage it can do to your furniture in your house and so forth. Listen, there is a brutal disease, and so I just said to the person, are you wanting to pray for that because for you and for the caregivers it would just be easier? Or are you doing it because you don't think that the person is enjoying life anymore? It just kind of depends. And honestly, most questions are that way. Maybe when you're young and you're a little bit overly black and white and ignorant, there's a yes and no to every question. But as you gain more wisdom and knowledge with life, and you know that the Lord sees the heart more than the outward actions that we do, things aren't always that simple. And so I shared with the individual about the experience that I had when my dad got sick and ultimately passed from the ramifications of him having Alzheimer's and dementia. And I've looked back on my podcast like 3 or 4 times to see if I've told this story, and I don't see that I have told this story. So if I have, I apologize, but I don't think I have. Now, I may have told bits and pieces of it to just people I know, and maybe even sermons here or there, but this is I would say, I mentioned the other day that I was talking with someone that has ALS, and he talked about God winks. This would be a little bit more than a God wink, but not necessarily a miracle. But as I recount just some of the different encounters I've had with God, this one would certainly rank, and it's one that I'll remember. But when my dad got sick with his disease, he had it for a number of years. I don't know if it's 7, 8, 9, 10 years, but towards the end, it definitely started taking a toll on him. And my brother and I, in the last probably a month and a half, 2 months of my dad's life, my brother took a 2-week stint. I think I took a 2-week stint. I think his wife maybe took a week, and then my brother took another week, and then I took a week. So it may have been the last couple months of my dad's life. And it was an interesting time, because by the time we got to that point, he no longer really recognized who I was. Now, I use that to my advantage sometimes, because sometimes he thought I was my older brother. And so I would just, mention to him, as I was making him mad, not intentionally, but people with Alzheimer's get agitated. I would just make sure he knew that I was my brother rather than me. And then most of the time, though, he was spending his time introducing himself to me. So I would say that there was probably a small fraction, those last few times I was around him, the 2 weeks for the one time, the 1 week for the other time, let's just say maybe 10% of the time he knew who I was. Maybe 10 or 20% he thought I was my brother. But the vast majority, 70% of the time, he didn't have a clue who I was. He thought I was someone from work. He thought I was just a stranger that he met that happened to be in his house, when he even recognized that it was his house. And it's once again brutal disease. Now, my brother was always trying to force my dad back into reality, and I decided that's just too frustrating. First of all, it's frustrating having to repeat yourself every 30 seconds, but then it's also it's hard to force someone to understand something that they're not capable of understanding. So rather than getting frustrated and trying to force him into reality, I decided quickly on during those last few weeks I was with him that's not the approach I was going to take. I was going to enter his world of reality. My brother didn't think it was a great idea, but my dad's wife did, and when hospice would come by, they were just amazed at how I could interact with my dad, because I was able to enter his world and communicate with him according to his world. So what that meant is, sometimes as he was trying to sleep and the lights were off, he's introducing himself to me, and he thinks I'm a coworker at his work. Sometimes he thought his parents used to rent out a room in the house when he was younger. I think a time or two he thought I was doing that. One time he was confused by the TV, because they almost begin seeing things. Like, my dad would point to a pile of blankets and say, "Who's that over there?" And I'd be like, that's Frankie, or that's Ralph, or I just come up with names, right? And every time he'd ask, I'd come up with a different name, and he's like, what's he doing? And it's just a pile of blankets. So the TV would confuse him too. He would think the TV's like a real person. And one time, he recognized it was a TV, and he's like asking questions about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is a new technology we just got in the store, and we sell these things, and we sell packages so you can watch things on it. And he's like, huh, well, how much does that run? And so I became a salesman, and I was trying to sell him his TV and cable package that he already had. And we went back and forth on it a few times, and finally I closed the deal. We shook hands on it, but he hadn't taken his medicine yet. That was always another battle to get him to take his medicine. And so I said, listen, I need to tell you that what this store is famous for is, like, we're famous for our pudding, okay? And so when we close business deals, we give a complimentary pudding to our customers. Would you like one of those? And he's like, puts his hands out like, huh, yeah, sure. And so I said, I'll be right back. So I went and got the store-bought, pudding in a cup that is as nasty as, it's not nasty, but it's just basic. But I think the the Jello one, Jello. But anyways, I put all his medicine in it, because he hadn't had his medicine yet. He was being a bear that day and wouldn't take his medicine. And so, I'm sitting there, and, I'm saying, what do you think? And he's like, puts his hands out. He's like, not bad. Meanwhile, as he's eating the pudding, he's taking his medicine. And I guess I like that the mental gymnastics, the mental challenge of being able to meet my dad where he was at and figure out how to get him to go and to do the things that you needed him to do, rather than to be yelling and arguing and having big blow-ups over it. The first couple days in those last few weeks, that's what it was like. But I'm like, this isn't working. It's stressing him out. It's stressing me out. And so it was just much more fun to enter into his world of reality. My dad's wife called me. I was at my mom's, which they only lived like a mile away. And she said, your father, I can't get him put his Depends on, because he was wearing that because he couldn't get to the bathroom. He's sitting, bare butt on his chair. He's going to have an accident. I'm like, all right, I'll come on over and I'll take care of it. So I left my mom's and I went over to my dad's, and sure enough, he's in the buck, just sitting there, on the chair. And who wants to see their dad that way? So I'm trying to get some clothes on him, I throw a blanket over him, and I'm like, trying to say, listen, you need to put some clothes on. He's like, why? And then I said, well, because you do. And he wasn't going to do it. And then I said, like, actually, I need to make some repairs on the chair. So if you don't mind getting some clothes on and getting up. And he wasn't going for that either. And then the real blessing with people with like this disease, they don't really remember what you said 5 seconds earlier. So I tried a third thing, and I said, listen, Dad, I have to tell you, the pastor and his wife are coming over, and you don't want the pastor's wife to see your, and I'll just bleep what I said. And his eyes got as big as like saucers, and needless to say, he was getting on his Depends really quick afterwards. So it's almost like when you have a young kid and like you're trying to get them to do things that they need to do, and they're sitting there saying no. You just got to be like, smarter than a 3-year-old. You got to be smarter than someone who's got this debilitating disease. And once again, you can go back and to try to force them into reality, but it's so much easier to just meet them in their reality, figure out what they need to hear in order to do what they need to do. And so I share that with people who have loved ones that are going through it, is to just, enjoy the time, enjoy the moment. And I have to be honest, like I didn't have, growing up, a lot of time that I spent with my dad. I would spend summers there, but he was always busy working and playing softball and doing different things that for the most part, I never had a lot of time with my dad. Maybe as a young kid, he'd take us camping up in Canada, and me and my brother would get a week to just go fishing with him. But short of like when I was maybe 6, 7, or 8, I hadn't really had that for the rest of my life. And so I did enjoy, like, he's stuck in the house and I'm stuck in the house with him, and I'm getting to know my dad as a friend. I'm getting to know my dad as a coworker. I'm getting to know my dad as a stranger, and the conversations that we had, they can't really remember things that are recent, but he had some memories of growing up as a kid. He had some memories of his family owning the land that his house was built on. And he was telling me who owned, what all they owned, and which uncle bought this, and which, whoever bought that. And I was learning stuff that, for the first 50 years of my life, almost, I never knew. And I'm learning it from a guy who doesn't have a memory anymore, but they do have a memory for stuff that happened, way back when. And even in having those conversations, sometimes you'd be like, I need to ask my mom and dad about that. And I said, and then he would just look at me, and he would have that moment of realization. He's like, they're not alive anymore, are they? And he wouldn't always come to that realization, but when he would ask questions like that, I wouldn't lie. I'm like, no, Dad, they're not. I'm sorry. And he would handle it okay. And so that went on for the 2 weeks that I was there the first time, and in the 1 week that I was there, the last time I saw him before I died, before he died. And I remember when I was getting close to the time that I was having to leave, I was packing up all my stuff. I got an Uber to go to the airport, and I knew I had to tell my dad and his wife goodbye. And I was really struggling, like, how do I do this without just breaking down in tears, because I knew he was really sick, and I just had a feeling I wasn't going to get to see him again. And he was still able to somewhat get around on kind of one of those walkers that you can also sit on. So he was in the little dining area that's next to the kitchen. He's sitting in his Depends in a sweatshirt, kind of leaning forward in his chair, looking a little anxious, writhing his hands a little bit, which people with Alzheimer's will. And I needed to tell him goodbye. And as I told him goodbye, he just started crying, and I started crying too. For 75% of the time that I had been home around him, he didn't know who I was. But when it was time for me to tell my dad goodbye for the last time that I would ever see him again or talk to him again, God cleared his mind so that in that moment, I knew my dad, and my dad knew me. and we could tell each other goodbye. It was a powerful moment. And so I look at how hard a disease like Alzheimer's is, and maybe you're dealing with that with a family member or a loved one, and I think natural tendency is to just to want the person to die. And I don't mean to say that I didn't have those thoughts cross my mind. But when I look back on it, to have those 3 weeks where I'm pretty much with my dad 24/7, having a relationship with him I never really had before, that's a blessing, regardless of whether he knew me as a son or not. To get to know my dad from those different angles, as a cable salesman, a TV salesman, as a coworker, as whoever, it was a really cool experience. And then once again, to have God be so gracious as to not only give me that time with my dad, where I felt like I got to know him and got closer to him than I ever had before, in spite of his illness, to have God clear his mind when I was walking out that door for the last time, that I was able to tell him goodbye. So whether or not, like I said, you're dealing with this with your family, someone with dementia or dementia or Alzheimer's, or someone in cancer, don't be so quick to pray for them to die. It's uncomfortable to watch people die. It's uncomfortable to watch them suffer. But going back to Romans 8:28, I truly believe God works all things for the good of those who love him. And even in the midst of that brutal, brutal disease, God worked in the good of my life, at least, so that I was able to have that time with my dad and be able to tell him goodbye. Well, I appreciate you joining me for this episode of God Talk, and I hope it encourages you as you face the different things in your life, that even in the midst of some really painful things, if you allow God to work in it, if you look for God to work in it, he'll meet you where you're at, and he'll work it for your good. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you next week.